Democrat, and then you have like Fox News is the total other end. And then, everybody else is pretty much far left leaning. And it's crazy because now, I mean, even the perception of the media has changed, especially people's perception of Fox News during, the whole Black Lives Matter protest versus what the perception is now. Which it's just funny how like the philosophy of media can become cyclical in the way that like a true critical thinker may perceive the information that he's receiving from those channels. And I'm saying all that to say at the time when I was young, I didn't see any of that. You're not, and this is even after I had already read Behold a Pale Horse. You still don't see things. I think you have to experience certain things in order to really truly grasp them. So at the time, I didn't see all of the deception in the media for what it is. I could call it a thin layer of bullshit when it's really way deeper than that. You know what I mean? It seemed superficial to me, but obviously it's much deeper than that. It's
Right.
psychological. And that's even at the radio station.
If y'all haven't had a chance to check out the UB News interview I did a few years ago, check it out. It's fire. I'm actually giving y'all a replay right now. Out there right in the mission.
Is the one who actually makes the decision on what songs get played. So, the program director is never someone of the demographic, especially at Black radio stations, from who the music is made for. The program director is almost always, if you go to all of the urban stations right now in America, the program directors, the majority of them are old white men. So you're talking about an old white man, in many cases, an old white Jewish man, deciding what's hot and what gets spins. So, a prime example of this is, and I'll be quick with this story. It was like the time that Music Soul Child dropped way back in the day. For anybody who that's how old I was when I was working at the station.
Shout out to Philly.
Yeah, shout out Philly. So Music Soul Child had dropped, and the song Just Friends had came out. And the song Just Friends was like the hottest thing ever. Nothing was like it on the radio. Nothing was like Just Friends on the radio. So we had to listen to basically an old white man tell us that it wasn't hot until it was the #1 song in the country. And we finally had to start spinning it. So these are the kind of frustrations that you get into overall in just somebody deciding what's hot in your culture, because we associate our culture with what we hear on the radio. And of course, that's a whole, no, that's deceptive.
That's what's going on a micro level. You see it on a macro level. You see what I'm saying? So
right.
That's wild. So you was born in North Carolina, small town. Went to North Carolina A&E, A&M, excuse me.
A&T,
excuse me. So how was your upbringing? I usually ask everyone this. How was your upbringing? Did you hear anything about your heritage? About what lineage you come from? Whether it was
we didn't. Not really. We talked about. It's funny. We didn't really. That wasn't. I never had a grandmother who told me that we were Indian or anything like that. Right. I mean, I had a great grandmother, and I have people who look like Indians in my family, but nobody actually said the word Indian.
Right.
I was lucky in a sense that I got to know my great grandmother. I got to know my great great grandfather, and my great great grandmother, who lived to 100 and something, who was like in her full capacities at a very old age, and also the generation up under that, my great grandparents. So my great grandmother, my great grandfather, my great great grandmother. These are my maternal ancestors.
Maternal, right.
These are my maternal ancestors. My paternal ancestors.
So no African tribes mentioned, and
no, absolutely. Come on, that's ridiculous.
All right, just making sure that.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I'm sure somebody can say that, and it could be true, but no, not over here.
Right, okay.
On my father's side, so my father's one of 14 children, and my father is the youngest, and my grandparents were really old. So when I was young, my grandparents were already in their 80s. I think I can, at the youngest, I don't know exactly how old they were when I was born, but they were up in age.
Hey, if y'all listening in right now, drop a fire emoji. If the audio is cool. This is my interview with UB News. We got an up and coming interview coming soon, so I thought I'd display this one. I'm probably going to start putting a list of all my interviews that I've done over the years. Y'all let me know if y'all can hear this loud and clear.
Or a great grandparent on that side of the family. But I've definitely seen the genealogy records going back and searching my family records. The cool thing is how similar my grandparents lived on my father's side to how my grandparents lived on my mother's side. It's very interesting. Like they all lived the very rural lifestyle. My grandfather on my father's side, he had a lot of land that he ended up buying for, pennies on the acre way back in the day. And so he had a farm and he had some animals and stuff like that. And so my father's family actually still lives on that land unto this day. So my father's got a huge family and it's a few hundred acres. So they got some land out there. On my mother's side, the memories that I have were my great grandmother and my great grandfather. I spent some time with them. My younger brother spent more time with them because when I was going to college, he would spend summers out there. But my great grandmother, Mama Eunice, had the best garden ever. She was one of the best cooks ever. One of the most humble, just God-fearing spirits ever. There's, as far as that goes, I come from a very simple family. You know what I mean? Most of my family is, agriculture people who lived on the land, things of that nature.
Sounds similar to my upbringing, man.
Yeah, I'm a country boy. Like I'm a country boy through and through.
Right.
You know what I mean? And since college, I've lived and and spent time in other places and larger cities. But I'm still attracted to the country. You know what I mean? That's still
that's the way I am. I'm a country boy.
That's where my heart resides. I'm not gonna ever really love the city like that.
That's where I am. I love. I'm a country boy, born and raised there my whole life. But I have experienced large cities, and the reason I love certain large cities is because of the conveniency, the dwelling of our people, just the huddle and the atmosphere. We don't get that back home in the country. It's like you said, it's secluded, it's quiet, it's dire, and it's very repetitive. It's repeated.
Yeah, you're right. There are definitely drawbacks. I think about it every time I go out and visit my father's family. It's like, hey, I want to live like this, but do I really want to live like this in the sense that not everything is like, I want to live off my land.
You can see why some of our people.
I'm so urbanized. Like right now I live in Charlotte, but my intent, like, even as we speak, I'm looking for some land I just want an old house in the country, or I want some land so I can build a house in the country. You know what I'm saying?
Idea. So if you want to go and get that piece of quiet, it's right there at your disposal at any time.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's the kind of the way I am. So let's fast forward a little bit. You went to college. You grew up in a pretty strict, well-educated house, living off the land. You became infatuated with media, wanting to do productions. How did you get into the what we would call the underside of what we know as history, things that they don't tell you? Because I've been watching your Boule series, and shout out to Steve Coakley, rest in peace to Steve Coakley. And you've been doing something that I've seen not too many people angle in or not be too good at. Steve Coakley was one of the greatest at destroying and explaining, exposing the ways of Boule. And I see you doing it in a way, in an updated version, in a new fashion, which is just as powerful as what the brother Steve Coakley was doing. So how did you get into that? Then we'll work our way into some of the other knowledge you got.
Well, the Boule was probably a little bit further down the line. Interestingly enough, I did have a chance to meet Steve Coakley when I was in college. Even at the time when I met him, I didn't really understand the depth of everything that he was talking about. Like the young minds just can't comprehend. And it was cool because we actually exchanged a couple of emails, but I wish I knew then what I know now. We always say that, right? I wish I knew then knew how to talk to him and knew what to ask him. The level of wisdom just wasn't there for me to really take advantage of that relationship when I had it. So because he was good enough to be like, hey brother, if you ever have any questions about any of this, send me an email. And he's a brother who accepted emails and would send you an email back. So even in the spirit of him, like, I feel like in terms of where I'm going, and because I don't really know where I'm going in terms of what I'm going to do next, but I do know that the spirit of Steve Coakley in itself is part of, I feel like, a responsibility. So I'm much obliged to be doing the work on the Boule.
I
And I do.
definitely see his energy in you, brother, and especially where you angle it in. Your production of things is quite attractive to the eyes, and that's what I know that these up and comer and the modern people in this millennium like to see fast bass. They like the imagery. They like the 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 voiceovers, the production you put together is beautiful. So since you breaking down the bootleg, I've also seen some of your older stuff dealing with the Americas. How did you start it undercovering and looking at all these hidden secrets in history and sciences of the Americas?
I mean, it really came down to reading the Old Testament. And having a like internal will and an internal love for world geography. So I love nature. I always used to read encyclopedias and wanted to know the longest rivers and the tallest mountains and the biggest lakes and all that. Couple that with the fact that because I haven't really gotten into how I got into the underside of the dark part. In a quick way, it started off with investigating the media. Then it started off investigating the Holocaust. Then it started investigating the identity of a certain group of people. Then I was like, well, crap. Then I started reading old maps. And then I started combining information. I would combine religious information with, I would combine scripture with maps, with history that wasn't scripture, so to speak, old books, old accounts, old sea accounts, trade stories, so to speak. Then things just kind of lined up, especially once you start understanding the Old Testament, not the New Testament, the Old Testament, the Torah especially. Okay, because everything that we need to know, that not only is the land that they're referring to, America, but that we are the people who the book says we are. You just have to. It's something that, unless you have investigated for yourself, it's hard to explain. So when I was reading the Old Testament, and they are what they would call during the promise to Abraham, and they start outlining the geography of the promised land.
So before you go in, on that, right? I didn't mean to cut your wisdom. So was you always brought on the Bible, or is that
no, not at all? I mean, I only use the
too?
Bible because it's the most reliable reference ever. I didn't grow up religious at all. Like, we went to church a couple of times, but it wasn't like, I went to church with my grandmother, like when we went, like we stayed with her on weekends, and it was like, well, that was church weekend. But for the most part, like, we didn't grow up like in a
interest into like looking at this Torah and understanding that it has valid.
Because once you read all the most credible history books in the world, it all goes back to the Old Testament. Mm-hmm. It's the foundation of all the world's history and knowledge. Mm-hmm. So any book that postulates that it has older wisdom than the Torah, most likely is a plagiarization of the Torah. I can rest firmly in that. Because everything that came, the only thing that could possibly be before Torah would be the book of Jasher, which we know in the first chapter of Joshua was already a book and compilation. Other than that, you have to think, if you start looking at the mysticism of other quote unquote older cultures, especially when you talk about in the Eastern world, a lot of people like to point to the Hindus. A lot of people like to point even to the cultures in Central America, like the Mayans. These are all all of these cultures can significantly be tied to stories of the Old Testament. So even from the standpoint of, let's say if we take from the standpoint of, say, comparative linguistics, when people first started talking and talking became an organized thing, the root phonetic syllables in their roots have the oldest roots on earth, and here in America as well. So we actually know that the languages of the Eastern world were brought to the Eastern world. Now we can try to figure out how it was done. We could say, hey, a group of people came over here and this language evolved into something else. But we do know.
So let me slow you down right there, because I want to get to some more of your actual accurate information, but this is a beautiful topic right now, so I want to kind of elaborate on this. You're saying that the root of the languages started from a one particular spot and then introduced to another spot?
Oh yeah, I mean that's pretty much how, I mean, even when they try to use the evolution of humans, we're not going to call it evolution, just the hybridization of humans. In addition to the hybridization of language, that's really essentially what we're talking about. A lot of these things were actually known by some of the most, I would say, popular scholars of maybe centuries ago, where they knew that, say, ancient Greek was rooted in Mayan, the ancient Babylonians rooted in Algonquin. These are things that among the academic aristocracy or the academic elite at the time,
And
especially the Freemasonic white elite. These were books that were. It's funny because I know they probably never anticipated that we would get our hands on some of their most secret books. But this was common knowledge among the especially the, I would say, the top academic historians of maybe 1820 basically from about 1750 to 1820. This was common knowledge.
So as we breaking this down right now, this is the question. I want you to keep building on this topic, but now is the time frame, is this happening historically ancient time that they telling you, or is this happening in a more recent time?
It is. I mean, probably 1,000 years more recent. Probably 1,000 years more recent. So we're not that far detached from quote unquote biblical times. And a few people, most notably Anatoly Fomenko, who was a guy who was a Russian
mathematician.
Yes. Yeah, he's a mathematician. Although I have my issues with his assertion that Moscow is Jerusalem, based off something very small that was written, I believe, in the book of Malachi. So he seems to overlook the entire geography of the Torah to highlight a very small point in the book of Malachi to try to make the postulation that Moscow is Jerusalem. Nonetheless, the other part of his theory that involves astronomical dating, he seems to have proven that, at least through the observation of certain astronomical phenomena, being able to date those through certain cross-reference dates in the past, that there absolutely, according to him, has been 1,000 years that were basically created out of thin air. So basically we should be in the year, if we're starting at zero, and zero is an arbitrary number because it's based off the life of Christ, and that's it. The thing about the year zero is the most legitimate way to be able to date something is based off an astronomical phenomenon or even like an earthly event. For example, let's say the flood or a major eclipse or something major that would happen. Then you could date from a certain thing, but you're really talking about an arbitrary date that's based in religious doctrine, so to speak. And here's the thing. You could even call the entirety of Torah and the Old Testament, and I don't include the New Testament at all. The Torah and Old Testament, you could call them religious doctrine until you understand it's not a religious book. It's a history book. It's a book of nature. it's also a book of mystery. So for anyone who doesn't truly have the proper amount of wisdom, they're going to read through several things and not understand it. Or they're going, and it's the book is almost written to make you assume something that isn't true. Even our idea of God as a, when we think of God, and, I've used the term loosely, God is a title for one, God isn't a name. And when God is first mentioned, when God decides that he wants to create man in our image, God is a multiplicity. He's not a singularity. And we call him he, but we already know that it exists more than once. And then in order for us to gain more wisdom, that's when we have to start digging into older text, just so we can get a good comparative analysis on what exactly we're talking about. So, even from the single definition of saying God and that God meaning one thing is philosophically and foundationally flawed from the first chapter of Genesis. So even the word God doesn't mean what we think it does. It's not one single entity. So, the book is only for the wise. And wisdom is fleeting because you're always learning something. You'll never, here's the one thing, I'll never pretend like I know everything, and everything that I know could change tomorrow. So I'm very careful about how I present information. I present especially things that I know to be true in sets of definitive questions. Because every time I learn something and think I know something, that thing that I think I know, I really don't know.
And
I
that's
might
what
have a better
that's the
understanding of
only
something.
and that's the only thing that science can really provide an absolute fact on, is that things is going to change. That's about the only thing that's a fact that won't change in science.
Right. And that's I don't even know what you call that. That is what it is, so to
Yeah,
speak. That
it
is what it
is.
is. So
So
that's not observationally, that has no, I can't take that to anywhere and cash that check. You know what I'm saying?
right, absolutely. So as you break down some of the ways you started to incorporate some of your history, and now you're looking at this Torah and you're putting it together, is it safe to say that some of these stories are actual real stories? For instance, the Noah story. Is this Noah story maybe explaining how these languages possibly could have spread it from the Americas to other spots?
Well, that's the Tower of Babel story explains the language. The Tower of Babel story before Noah exits the ark. But it's interesting. So yeah, the Tower of Babel story would more explain the language. So the story of Noah is actually two different stories. Once again, it's just something you learn once you really get more insight into what you're reading. So the story of Noah is actually two different stories.
Can you explain
Um,
that for us?
well, it's
For the
hard to
computer's
explain right
sake.
now. I had like a whole video explaining it.
Okay,
So let me get into the
that's
language
the
thing
drop.
first, okay? Because these are things that, okay, a big issue that comes along when you put out this kind of information is that without the qualifying background, knowledge, or information, there is too much opportunity for somebody to hear something that I say and
And
they'll
become skeptical.
go regurgitate it out of context elsewhere and then lay the misrepresentation at my doorstep. And
Absolutely,
I put too much work,
absolutely.
I put too much time into my work for that to happen.
No,
So,
absolutely, absolutely. We
and
appreciate you too. And listen, I want to say we appreciate you for coming on. This is
oh yeah,
actually
no
a
doubt.
deal, and I'm getting a lot of insight of things I didn't even have understanding on, that you enlighten me on right now as we speak. So I want to say appreciate you, and shout out to the chat. We got 250 in here already. Let's share this. I need everybody to share this on all your social media outlets. Let's bring in 500 people to this live stream, you guys. I'm gonna need y'all to hit the like button. I'm gonna need y'all to drop some fire emojis in the chat to let us know if you're enjoying the bill. Shout out to the brother UB News. Let's continue.
Okay, so bet we'll talk about this language thing because there's a very interesting thing about language, and especially we can make a few biblical correlations. For us, just to make it simple for us to understand the Tower of Babel. Um, I could simply say, hey, it's located in America, but I had to dig to find that. Okay. So there are not no references in the King James, but especially the book of Jasher, and the book of Jubilees. Now, in my heart, I trust Jasher more than Jubilees, although I don't think the book of Jubilees is completely false. Just like I don't really trust the New Testament, but I'm not ready to say everything in the New Testament is completely false. As you know, as a true scholar, I still have to read it as though it were true and apply what applies. Now, I've called out a lot of false information in the New Testament. So far I haven't really found anything that's true. But it doesn't mean that there's isn't anything, there's no truth there. Um, as far as the language in the Tower of Babel, so we'll just talk about what we know in translations, right? Because, as people, we're just now reading, okay? Now we're reading somebody else's language. Now, even the ancient writings that we are getting are still being transliterated by somebody from ancient language into our language. So the idea that things can get lost in the translation should go without saying at this point. Um, so when you look at the King James version, one of the first things you'll notice about the Tower of Babel and the situation in Babel, if you look at that chapter in Genesis, which I believe is chapter 10, I believe it's chapter 10 and 11. I'm pretty sure it's chapter 10. If you look at those chapters in the Targum and you look at those chapters in the Septuagint, so the Septuagint is the Greek translation, okay? And the Targum is the Aramaic translation. You'll notice that certain information has been alleviated from those texts and how it appears in the King James Version. And of course, once you got your thinking cap on, you understand that these alleviations really do tell the story. Similarly to the difference in the first Genesis of Targum, where the verse says, "And God said, let us make man in our images." Well, if you read that in the Targum, you'll see that God said before the 70 angels that ministered before him. So now we've got 70 angels, and we also have a supreme being over that only gets recognized as one being when it gets translated to the King James version. Similarly, when we're talking about the Tower of Babel, we're gonna you'll see that in the Septuagint, it says that the world was of one lip and of one race. Okay, we're all good there. So we think. Well, the word race is alleviated from the King James. All right, that's the first thing. Now, previously in the previous chapter, you'll notice that in the division of the nations, and they talk about the sons going into their inherited land. This is prior to the biblical narrative of the tower, and it says that these men, that the sons of Noah were divided into their nations and into their tongues. Now that was just in the previous chapter. Now, if we're supposing that there's chronological accuracy to the time that these books were written, then just next in chapter 11, the book immediately contradicts itself when it says that the whole earth was of one language. Okay, from these spread the nations. So what is happening here is that we have two narratives of possibly the same story, or we possibly just have contradictory narratives. When I say contradictory in terms of chronologically, did one happen before the other? Now, if we can see that that's a case, right? If the world was of one lip and we're assuming that the text is true, then we have to start looking at the chronological orders of the previous chapters just to see if certain things line up. So